Yeah, so welcome. We're going to start with a short practice together. This is our discussion on what it means to prepare for social gatherings, like with holidays and family and friends or community, and to do that wisely and well with Hunger, Hope, and Healing's perspective on how to be prepared so you're not showing up at risk of behaviors that you then end up regretting or that you feel uneasy about. So let's begin with a short practice together. So you can take a comfortable seat and get centered in yourself in the present moment. In fact, as you're arriving, see if you can kind of set aside whatever is not essential to the here and now. Allow yourself to set aside thoughts of future and thoughts, excuse me, and thoughts of past, just for this moment right now. And try to listen into the present moment, which is the only moment that we really have. I'm going to ask you to visualize that as you breathe into yourself in the present moment, the intrusions, the obligations, the cares and concerns, the frenzies, as you breathe into your sense of self in the center, imagine those things moving out, giving you some space or distance, as if you were at the center like a lighthouse, and the boats in the harbor were kind of going out to sea a bit. They're giving you some space. And as you imagine things like obligations, apprehensions, the cares and concerns for others that leave you depleted or anxious, as you imagine those things kind of moving out in the bay, let the lighthouse that is you get a little bit stronger, a little bit more upright, and a little bit brighter inside. So you're kind of reclaiming the space within you that is yours and asking all those myriad ways in which we get dissipated, agitated, distracted, overwhelmed, asking those to move out, to give you some space. And then see yourself here in the present moment arriving, and your attention is primarily on behalf of yourself. You are here for you. And you can raise your hands to your heart. And then gently bow your head to your heart. And release your hands, and please open your eyes. Okay, so thank you for being interested in the conversation and, really trying to make this an experience that you can have where you get some wisdom, some relief, some understanding about yourself. And also it's an understanding about human nature, right? It's like, why do we feel anxious to go to a social gathering or a family gathering where food is involved? What's happening for us inside? And what are we bringing with us to those experiences? If we think back on in our development, we internalized or acquired certain templates or way of seeing ourselves, the ways that we might interpret our responsibilities in life, the ways that we anticipate other people will be receiving us or rejecting us. That's actually called, in neuroscience, those are called relational anticipations. So we have a sense of how we're going to be received or rejected, and what we have to do to have the reception be positive or at least non-harming versus having the reception be rejecting. Right. So when you have particular friends in your life, when you have certain ways of relating in your life, you probably don't think much about it. If there's a lot of resonance, if there's harmony, if there's empathy, if there's a lot of like, we kind of get each other. You don't likely approach those gatherings with a sense of apprehension or concern. It's the kind of gathering you're going to where there might be people there and there's going to be food there and there can be some unknowns there and it can feel very disquieting. So what sorts of people are those? The people that you aren't so confident about your sense of acceptance or maybe even your sense of connection with people. What kinds of foods? The kinds of foods that you may feel apprehension about, that you might feel like they're your trigger foods. And then what kinds of expectations might be there? The way that you might participate, the way you're supposed to show up, who you're supposed to be in this setting. So let's start at the top of that with people, the people that are going to be there. If you're going to a social gathering or a family gathering and you have a sense that how people are going to receive you or how they're going to be more connected to each other than they are to you, or the sense that there's a certain dynamic or a way that you're supposed to be, like more boisterous or more partyish and less bookish or less quiet. If you have a sense of all those things and yet you are, let's say, obligated to go, or it would be an important gesture to go because you have a family obligation or you have a social commitment, it's definitely helpful to not go too tired or too empty on your reserves, specifically your reserves for connection, resonance, and empathy, which I was talking about before. So when we get filled up by the places in our lives where we have a sense of connection, resonance, and empathy, that's kind of like fueling yourself with nutrition, with positive nutrition for your brain and your body. When you get filled up in that way, and you feel then kind of satiated, you feel connected enough, the amount of apprehension you'll have at any gathering you go to is going to be mediated. If we're in a deficit of connection, resonance, empathy, if we have a deficit of authenticity or transparency in our lives, or we aren't really feeling connected to other people in our full self, just in our operational self, they know us, right? Like maybe in your workplace, for example, you might have your operational self is there, but your full self doesn't get expressed there. Or perhaps even in your family system, like your family role, your family operational self is there, but your full self may not get to be expressed there. So if we're going to a social gathering with a deficit in connection, empathy, or resonance, we are more vulnerable to playing the role that is expected of us. We're more vulnerable to getting into the dance or the dynamic that is anticipated of us. And others are subject to this too. It's not only that we are showing up like that and feeling subject to these particular kinds of things. Everyone is showing up with their own susceptibilities. The difference here might be that we're paying attention or trying to do it differently. We're paying attention to the dynamic that we're finding ourselves in. We want to bring health and vibrancy to that. Other people may not even be aware that the dynamic is going on, so they may not have even the recognition that there's anxiety or apprehension. In fact, frequently people go to these kinds of gatherings and they just do the thing that they always do. It's like a ritual or a way to be at the picnic, the Memorial Day picnic, for example, or to be at the party. There's a certain way of doing things and it's very practiced. So they may not even register that they have any social anxiety. And perhaps some people that go don't have social anxiety. They happen to be just in their own life. They're a little bit more grounded. They've had some healing. They have some emotional resilience. They may not be experiencing the anxiety they were experiencing. I will say, if we look at my own life in the trajectory of my recovery, going to a social gathering now is a very at ease situation for me. But when I was in the early years of my recovery, and when I was still in my eating disorder, going to these social gatherings, going to these places was like torture. It just felt to me like there were so many unknowns. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to stand. I didn't know who to talk to. I would go to these art openings at my art school, and it was all buffets of food, and everyone was looking at the art and making the comments and eating the food. And I felt totally out of place, unpracticed. I didn't know what to do. And I ended up mostly grazing on food in kind of a slow motion binge, right? And it was terrifying and it was very uncomfortable. And I didn't know even then what to do after that kind of gathering. I just felt so depressed and so heavy and so lethargic that I would go back to my apartment and just isolate. So it was never really a successful experience of going to that sort of gathering. And with my family system, going to a family holiday or a family meal was very difficult and painful. There were so many pressures. There was so much unspoken tension. There was so much unresolved emotion in my family system. Nobody was talking about anything that was like genuine or interesting to me. And they didn't notice that I had an eating disorder. So the way that that felt to me was like, even this extreme representation was not enough to get their attention. And I didn't register that consciously, but I had a sense of not being seen at the same time that I had a sense of you only have a small window of permitted behavior or emotions. And if you push outside of that window, that you're going to make people uncomfortable. So I can recall going home for a Thanksgiving holiday a couple of years into my sincere effort to recover. Before that, I didn't really acknowledge that I had an eating disorder and I wasn't really getting into recovery. But I can recall this particular holiday where I went home and I felt so brittle and so fragile. Everything felt so tenuous. And then there was this meal that was going to be served. And I didn't know what to do. I was like frozen or paralyzed at the table. I didn't know what I was going to eat or what not to eat. There were certain foods that I felt like if I started eating them, I would never stop eating them. And this kind of Ferris wheel of crazy thoughts was going on in my head. It was really challenging to navigate that. I don't recall there being any emotional connection there. I recall there being emotional pressure between other people and also directed at me. And the whole thing was just very uncomfortable. And it wasn't a demonstration of my recovering self. I wasn't able to hold that together. So as I recall, I ended up eating very controlled amounts of food to keep myself safe and sane and stable in that situation. But then later, I couldn't sustain that. I was binging on familiar foods because I was in my familiar family home and those foods were available. And I had like gone so far into the day trying to manage, restrict, trying to be tenacious about not overeating. And I ended up in one of those cycles, like down the rabbit hole of feeling really, really unwell, just to say that. So we go to these social gatherings now as adults. We go as a previous member of a family system, and we're going to this family gathering or this social gathering that might act like a family. And everyone is subject to this kind of susceptibility that the old matrix becomes the matrix that we have together at this event, because we don't live so much with our families now. So when we get together, we have the possibility of kind of going back to the matrix as it was the last time that we were all together. And so sometimes you get home with your family and you're like, gosh, my siblings haven't grown at all, or my parents aren't growing at all. And what might be happening is that they're sliding back into the part of the shared pattern that you have with them and that they have with you. So you're all kind of slightly sliding back, which is why people feel weird when they go back to their parents' house and they start behaving in ways that they don't do in their daily life. But they feel like, oh, why am I doing this here? Why am I behaving like this? Why am I thinking like this? Why am I having these particular emotions like this? Because in the regular life, they don't have those susceptibilities. So that matrix is kind of slippery. It can captivate us until we are able to be like the lighthouse. We feel into ourselves and we ask these different boats to go out on the ocean and give us some space. So for example, if before you go to a family gathering, let's say for the holiday coming up for Memorial Day, if you go to a family gathering, a little more resourced on connection, empathy, and resonance, but also go having had enough exercise, like you've had the physical movement that you want, just in case your family's going to be sedentary when you're there. So go having had enough exercise, go to the family gathering, being hydrated enough, because it matters to your brain health and your mental health and your digestive health to be hydrated. Go to the family gathering with enough personal time before you go to feel connected to yourself, to feel like you are a resource for yourself. Now, that is something that you might have to prepare for several days in advance. if you see this gathering is on Monday, Memorial Day, which is coming up in 10 days, you might want to make sure that the week in advance is not so chaotic, or it's not going to run you down so much. You're not going to be so exhausted, so that when you go, you feel connected to yourself and you don't feel like you're exchanging that social gathering for the time that you would have preferred to have for yourself. It should not feel like an exchange in this way, because then we are susceptible to feeling like I'm giving up something of myself to be here, and it's not really what I want to be doing. So rather, if we are connected with ourselves in advance, we can go feeling like, hey, I'm going to go see my family. And these might be people that we love or people that we have some difficulties with, or a combination of both, but we're going to go see them and be more clear-headed and able to stay in our lighthouse self, so that when we're there, like Uncle Bobby is being Uncle Bobby, and we aren't so hijacked by that, or your sister or brother are being themselves, and you're watching with a little bit more space, like, oh, that's a dynamic that we have between us. I see my next step is that I'm supposed to be agreeing with them or opposing them or be cynical alongside of them. My next step in this dance is, and that's where you get those relational anticipations, the patterns that are there, which we will slide right into the footsteps of, just like footsteps on a dance floor. We're going to slide right into those if we show up without a healthy enough connection to ourselves. Now, a couple other things that are like pragmatic. So when you go, again, enough connection, empathy, and resonance, enough personal time, not exhausted, not overwhelmed, and not dehydrated. And also, don't go with your blood sugar too low. So don't starve yourself in preparation for going to an event where there's going to be food, and then have the hungry ghosts get activated. If we go with our blood sugar dysregulated, a number of things could happen. One is that we get socially anxious and the blood sugar reacts poorly to that. Another is that we arrive thinking that food's going to be served at X time in the afternoon, and it's not. We arrive and the full buffet is out there. Everybody's put their food on the table, but nobody's eating yet, and you're very hungry, and it's distracting, like to have the conversation, but nobody else seems to be going towards the food. They're just standing there with, let's say, drinks, and that could be alcoholic or not. Maybe you don't partake in that way, and there's the food, but you're starving, but nobody else is eating, and you're very distracted about what's happening, and you start to get into this quandary of, do I meet my physical needs or my social needs? Do I meet my nutritive needs or my interactive needs here? And if you're showing up with your blood sugar too low, the tug is going to be with your animal body and your animal brain, not with your heart brain, not with your conscious brain, but with your animal brain. You're going to feel distracted and uncomfortable. And then what can happen is you've got this tension about what is going on in the dynamic, and you start choosing things to put on your plate, and you take one of everything, or you eat things as you're walking around the buffet and you overload your plate, and you can feel that it's got you, like the food werewolf is taking over. You might be socially graceful about it, but you can sense that it's taking over. Or alternatively, you arrive at a party too hungry, blood sugar low, and you realize that the foods that are there are not foods that you feel nourished by. They're not foods that you would choose to eat. And there's very little that's going to satisfy you. And you arrive and everyone's already eating and partying, and they're gregarious and loud, and someone's barbecuing and someone's playing badminton, and people are talking politics, and they're holding a can of beer with a thing that holds it to keep it cool. And you're arriving and you're wondering where the healthy food is, but it's kind of chaotic and you can't really figure it out. And your blood sugar's low, and you can start having a lot of mixed emotions about food, about yourself. I mean, it can get kind of like radio static in your mind. What do you do? How do you make choices? Where do you connect socially? Where do you sit down with your plate of food? All these things can end up getting aroused in your mind and your brain, and that won't help with food choices either. So go resource enough with connection, empathy, and resonance. Make sure you're hydrated, you've had some physical exercise, you're rested enough, you're not totally depleted or run down by your work schedule, you've had some personal time. And then these are recommendations that you can do proactively in advance. Find out if at this gathering, especially if it's a new gathering for you, or even if it's a familiar family gathering. I'll give you a couple tips for that. But let's say, find out if at this gathering, is there a time where the food's going to be served? You can ask the host, hey, what do you expect for the mealtime? I just want to plan my day. I want to plan around my own appetite. And that proactive question does not have to reveal that you have a dilemma with food or with nourishing yourself. It could reveal that you're proactive and you take care of yourself. You can also plan to go to a party knowing that it might be chaotic in terms of what they're doing with food. And you could say to the host or the hostess in advance, hey, I'm really glad to come. I'll have come from a lunch date, or I'll have come from an important meeting where I was having food, or I'll come a little bit later. The food I know will already be served. No problem. I'm coming to see people. I'm not coming to partake of the food. So don't count me in for this burger or whatever it's going to be. So what you can do is decide to go to a gathering for the social gathering and plan in advance not to be too hungry when you're there and not to need food when you're there, and to prevent yourself from having the awkward temptations of food you don't want to be eating. And you can proactively tell somebody in advance, because otherwise they tend to push food on you. They tend to want to make you something, or they could feel insulted that you're not eating the Jell-O with the marshmallows suspended in the middle of the Jell-O. Marshmallows and fruit suspended in Jell-O. It's one of the family foods that we have at our gatherings. So you can do that kind of proactive work in advance of the gathering. That's really helpful. So you've already said something, and then you get to kind of adhere to it when you're there, and you can have this kind of personal integrity with yourself about that. Now, let's say you're going to a family gathering where you know what the dance steps are because it's a familiar thing that you do. It's really helpful to have an ally at your family gathering. If your family has some tension, right, it's really helpful to have an ally there. Someone in the family who could be your ally, where you let them know in advance how you want to show up, what you'd like to do, what your best outcome would be, and you kind of give them that information and ask them if they could support you in that process. And, if somebody asked me to be their ally in my family system, I would be so honored. I would be so grateful to help them. I would feel like, wow, what a privilege that thank you, Stevie. What a privilege that they're asking me for this kind of support, because I don't want them to have a downward spiral at the family gathering either. And we're going to end up being closer to each other. We're going to know each other better because they've asked for my help and my support. Of course, you've got to ask someone where it feels like it's a safe ask for you. It should be an attuned person, a person you can have as an ally. So that might be something that you start working on, now for Christmas or for Hanukkah. You start working on that now. It's May. Perhaps you don't have an ally in your family for the upcoming Memorial Day weekend, but you can create an allyship with somebody in your family system. If you don't have that, then what we recommend is, we call this bookending in Hunger, Hope, and Healing. That is that you text somebody in advance of the gathering. You tell them how you're doing. You say what your commitment might be for your self-care. And then you text them when you're leaving the gathering. And that's called bookending, like as if this bookshelf behind me didn't have sides. So it would need bookends to hold the books on the shelf, right? So bookending is how you hold yourself, because you're asking for support on either side. And you ask in advance. In our Hunger, Hope, and Healing community, we ask in advance, hey, can somebody bookend me for this event I'm going to? And then they get their bookends established so they can have support with and from each other, right? So those are some specific things that you can do. And I wanted to answer a couple questions too. And thank you very much for being here. So I have a couple questions. Oh, yes. Okay, this is one of them. So if you're going to tell somebody in advance, even a family member, how you're going to arrive, at what time, how long you can stay is another thing you can put in there. Like if you want to arrive after the food frenzy and stay for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, if you want to take care of yourself in that way, it's okay to create a container that you can be safe in. And safe means safe with yourself and with food, safe with your personal decisions about this. You also want to respect, especially if you're getting into your recovery, it's really important to respect your overall well-being relies on a certain routine during the day and the nighttime. So you have to respect things like your sleep schedule, your nutrition and nourishment schedule, your movement schedule. When you have really solid recovery, you can, of course, be flexible. You can have a lot of resilience in there. You can sometimes have your meal later, and you can sometimes have it earlier. But when we are in the first phases of recovery, we really want to demonstrate to ourselves a kind of commitment to ourselves. It's helpful not to vary too far from the kind of care that you actually want to give someone who's, let's say, recovering from an illness, or they're recovering from an injury, or when you're working with, you're training your dog to do something, you have to have consistent training, right? You want to make sure the dog knows what is bedtime, what time do you get to wake up in the morning, when are you going out, not 2 a.m., right? So in the same way, our mammalian brains need this kind of routine training so that our early recovery is going to be more stable. If we're hither and thither, we can't really tell what's working for us and what's not. And hither and thither might reflect a kind of disorganized or chaotic internal world, which could be reflective of our early family experience. So when we bring a schedule into our lives, yoga and Ayurveda calls this dinacharya. When you bring a dinacharya into your life, a schedule, you start repairing the early life chaos or neglect or haphazardness of things. You're actually repairing that in the present to give yourself a sense of routine. And we are creatures that depend on rhythm and routine. In order to have spontaneity, we need to have enough rhythm and routine. Otherwise, spontaneity actually becomes chaos. We might feel spontaneous, but it's kind of chaotic. And oftentimes we then look back on a certain event and we feel like, oh yeah, I really messed that up. I didn't do that so well. So that's one thing somebody asked me about. Let's see, here's another question. Right, don't arrive with low blood sugar yet. So I answered that one for you. Yes, okay. Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yeah, so let's say that it's you're at work and it's a spontaneous kind of pop-up gathering for the holiday, and somebody's brought I don't know, donuts and pizza and stuff like that that you find to be kind of threatening foods, and you feel obligated to go to the work party. What to do? That's the question that's here right now. Because the event came up spontaneously, but you feel obligated to go. Everyone else is going, and you know that the foods that are going to be there just got kind of brought in, so they're not really high quality foods that you want to be eating. Yeah, what to do in that situation. We just had a student in Hunger, Hope, and Healing talking about this, where at her place of work, she's a nutritionist, a dietitian, and at the staff meeting, she works in an eating disorder treatment facility, and at the staff meeting, they served pizza. That was their staff meal during the meeting, and she prefers not to eat pizza, particularly this level of quality of pizza, because of the ingredients. She prefers to eat something else. But then she felt like she had to demonstrate that she's okay with pizza in this workplace because it's an eating disorder facility, and therefore they're always scrutinizing what the patients are eating or not eating. So she had this dilemma to look at. And so, what do we do in those moments? And that's similar to your question about being in the workplace or having a pop-up kind of food activity. I would say this: to the extent that you've established a routine and a rhythm in your life, you've established this caring cycle for yourself. When you see a pop-up event, you're actually going to feel more confident to say, I'd be glad to be there and take a cup of tea with you if you're not hungry. Because if the event is scheduled, but you have a regular kind of meal thing that you're doing that nourishes you, if your breakfast, lunch, and dinner are kind of rhythmically established in place, and you're not then at this pop-up event at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not really hungry, you haven't made yourself too dehydrated, too depleted, over caffeinated, overstressed, and so on, you're going to be able to go and just enjoy the social gathering. And I would say take a social decoy with you. This is my teacup. It's actually got tea in it. But take something with you that you're holding in your hands. If you don't want to eat the food that's there, take something with you that occupies your hands and your mouth. Like this, since other people are also going to be eating, right? But if you do want to partake of the food, you have to decide for yourself, are you in a place where having a piece of pizza feels, 80% okay? That it's not going to turn into something that you regret and then shame yourself about. It's not going to turn into a binge where you're 3 or 4 slices of pizza in and you feel terrible. You don't know how to stop, and you're telling yourself that tomorrow's going to be different, and therefore have a donut now as well. So if you don't feel like, I would say 80% confident that you could just have the piece of pizza and actually taste it and see if it's even enjoyable, then I wouldn't run the risk when you're getting into the early phase of your recovery, because the risk can be like, let's say you're in early recovery. So you're like, oh, I just have a few days or a couple weeks, or I'm just early on in my recovery. I'll start over again tomorrow. Starting over again is one of the very common phrases that women say to themselves. I'll start again tomorrow. I'll start again on Sunday. Friday's coming. I'll start again next week. And so if it's kind of early phase recovery and you don't yet have full discernment about, how okay are you going to be with this particular food that's often a trigger food for you, then engaging with it would be a risk. And you might want to consider, do you want that setback just to make these other people happy at the social gathering? Do you want that setback just so that other people are not uncomfortable with you? Do you want to have that setback so that you don't feel uncomfortable with them not eating what they're eating? Like, what is the value of your recovery versus the expense of the setback? And recovery does become something where you end up on, higher ground, and you can be stable there, and there's no risk running. You actually feel like a lot of equanimity and ease and sovereignty and full permission to make decisions and to communicate clearly with people. Recovery is more than abstinence from difficult food behaviors. It's a full spectrum recovery. So let's say that in the early stage, you want to be more protective of your fledgling efforts to be well and solid and grounded, right? So if you're at this gathering and let's say that you are really hungry, it is a pop-up work event, and you've been restricting like crazy and you haven't had any fat or salt or flavor, and there's a piece of pizza and some soda, and it's going to just light up your taste buds, and you're going to be in it. Like your mammalian brain is like, ding, ding, we're having the pizza and the donut and whatever it is. The risk there wasn't actually the gathering. The gathering happened to be there, but the risk was if you were really restricting calories or flavor, if you're restricting fat or salt or appropriate flavors for your mouth. We say in Ayurveda there are 6 flavors, and they are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. And so if we lack certain flavors and then we go to this party, some of these fast foods, some of the chemically made foods, they are made to promote your addiction to them, because they hit those flavor spots in the body, and they also generate neurotransmitters that want more of that food. So do you want to be owned by the food industry? You could also ask yourself when you're looking at that, let's say it's not a high-end production of pizza or donuts, you can say to yourself, okay, what is the expense on my recovery? What is the value of social comfort right now between me and others? And the third thing, do I want that pizza to own me? Do I want that food industry thing to own me? Or do I want to own myself? Do I want to feel like I get to decide? I got to take my brain back from all those chemicals actually in the foods. Who's going to own who here? Do I get to own myself? That's a question that you get to actually ask yourself. So yeah, thank you for your question. I hope that's helpful. I don't go to a corporate work environment. I'm self-employed and always have been since I left living at a retreat center. So I don't have the same tension in that regard. So I'm hoping I'm getting close to the dilemma that you face in that situation. Okay, and here's one more question, and I'll answer it, and then we're going to sign off actually. So this question is, you're there, it's already gotten you, you're in the undertow, what to do? This person has heard me talk about this before. So sometimes at a social gathering or a family gathering, especially early on in my recovery, I would just take a break in the bathroom, like just go to the bathroom and close the door and be alone. I didn't have to always go to the bathroom. I just needed to be alone, like to kind of regain my sense of composure and to let my neural synapses come back to me. So I didn't feel like I was trying to be the social expectation, which is actually exhausting sometimes. I felt like I could recalibrate and come back into me. And I recommend that you have some tools in your pocket, like take a time out in the bathroom and pull out one of your yoga breathing practices, or, do like put your hand up on the wall in the bathroom and do a little stretching of the shoulder, kind of come back into yourself, just getting a little bit of movement in the body and saying, okay, it's just this present moment. We're right here, right now. Here we are. And as you breathe that in, get reconnected to your sovereign self. Make a commitment that you're not going to abandon yourself at the party. Just like you don't want to be abandoned by a friend at a party, you will not abandon yourself at this party. Make that commitment to yourself. Okay, so that you know you can take a break, you can go pee, you can get some water, you could walk around the block, you can leave the party for a minute or two, go for a walk, you go check out the vegetable garden in the backyard, or, look at the flowers. You can take a break, you can wander off, you can find a place to sit down that's quiet. Make an effort on your behalf to take that kind of break. I'm answering this question here from this. Thank you for asking it. You're allowed to have personal time. But if you go to the party already nourished enough, like you've made an investment, you've saved some stuff in your personal resources account, you've got some fuel in the system, you're going to be less susceptible to getting run over by things at the party. So keep that in mind too. Don't go depleted and hope for the best. Go resourced and then do your best, like that. Okay. Thank you for your questions. And also thank you very much for being here. Further questions can be asked. You can put them in the chat below this video. Also, click the like button if this has been helpful to you. Let me know in the comments what other topics you'd like me to cover. And if you'd like, you can hit the subscribe button so you get a notification the next time that we have one of our community conversations. So thank you again. Thank you very much for being here. Namaste. Please take care of yourselves. Bye.